She pointed her finger and shouted right there on live television. Her voice cut through the room, accusing him of ignoring the law and making excuses for criminals. Over 57 million people were watching. One of them was an 81-year-old American, judge famous for never backing down from a debate. The other was a 37-year-old African president, raised in a country shaped by war, but trained in law, justice, and truth. He didn't yell back. He didn't get defensive. Instead, he stayed calm, and with quiet, steady words, he turned the conversation upside down. What he said next revealed something so uncomfortable, so powerful, that the judge, known for her sharp comebacks, went completely silent. The clip went viral. Headlines exploded. And suddenly, the world was asking, how did a young African president end a judge's 30-year reign with just one question? And what truth did he reveal that left her in tears, openly regretting her words in front of a live audience? To understand how it all happened, we have to go back to the beginning. It was supposed to be just another live town hall, a polished debate on justice, with a smooth set, studio lights, and a carefully chosen audience. The atmosphere was calm, controlled, even rehearsed. But the guests weren't ordinary speakers. They were symbols of two different worlds, two different beliefs about justice. And before the night was over, that quiet studio would feel more like a courtroom than a TV show. The first to arrive was Judge Judith Shinelinati, 1 year old, sharp in black, face firm and focused. She was more than a television figure to many Americans. She represented order, discipline, and old-school values. When the host welcomed her, she simply nodded. She didn't need applause. Her reputation spoke louder than words. Then came the man who would quietly challenge everything she stood for. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, just 37 years old. He didn't enter with fanfare, didn't wear a flashy suit or a lapel pin. No entourage, just a plain navy jacket and a calm, steady presence. He wasn't there to perform. He was there to speak the truth. There was something about him, how he moved, how he looked at the room, that made people sit up straighter. Even before he spoke, people could sense his purpose. The host, veteran journalist Peter Langston, opened the program. He called it a conversation about criminal justice reform between generations and between different visions of law and leadership. It started light. Judge Judy smiled and said with a smirk, "I've been judging cases longer than this young man has been alive." The audience laughed, but no one had any idea how serious and how unforgettable the conversation was about to become. Even President Ibrahim Traoré allowed himself a faint smile. For a moment, the room felt relaxed like any other public forum. The mood was light. Then the host, Peter Langston, asked a deeper question, one that called, not just for opinion, but for real insight. "Mr. President," he said, "you've spoken often about systemic inequality in justice systems. How does that apply on a global scale?" Traoré folded his hands and leaned forward slightly. His voice was calm, thoughtful, even quiet, but every word hit hard. He spoke about justice systems around the world, especially those built on old colonial laws, how many of them, even today, are used to target the poor, the powerless, and people of color. He never mentioned the United States directly. It didn't have to. His message was clear and personal. Justice must be more than punishment, he said. It must include the awareness of who gets punished and why. The tone of the room shifted. There was no applause this time. Some people nodded. Others stiffened in their seats. He hadn't picked a fight, but he had drawn a line. Judge Judy leaned back slightly, her face now tight with disapproval. Her fingers tapped. Her chair a gesture longtime viewers of her show knew well. Trouble was coming, and then it did. She pointed directly at him, her voice sharp and loud. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she said, breaking the silence. I've spent over 30 years in real courtrooms, not press events, not panels. I've seen people of all races make choices, some good, some bad, and I've held them responsible. She leaned forward, finger still pointed. Don't sit here and tell me the justice system is broken. I know justice. I've delivered it. The room froze. The earlier warmth and laughter were gone. The host didn't move. The crew stood still. The audience sat in stunned silence, some with mouths slightly open, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Judge Judy hadn't just disagreed. She had gone on the attack. Okay? She had accused a sitting president on live TV of not knowing what he was talking about. But what she and the audience didn't realize was that President Traoré wasn't going to argue. He wasn't going to raise his voice. He wasn't going to match her fire with fire. He was about to do something far more powerful. He was going to make her hand everyone watching listen. Her words still hung in the air like a shot that had just been fired. Everyone waited for him to fight back. But he didn't. He stayed. Still, President Ibrahim Traoré sat still. Upright eyes, steady breath. Calm. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't rush to respond. Silence. In contrast to Judge Judy's outburst, only made the room more tense. People had expected a fight. What they got instead was total composure. Then, after what felt like a long pause, he leaned forward just enough for the microphone to catch his voice. He spoke softly. No anger, no harsh words. Just one question. Judge Sheindlin, he said, in all your years on the bench, did you ever stop to ask why the same communities kept ending up in your courtroom? The room leaned in. Its tone was careful and calm. It didn't sound like an attack. Sounded like a door being opened. A chance for reflection. But Judge Judy didn't pause. She didn't ask for clarity. She didn't even seem to consider the question. Instead, she answered sharply. Because they commit more crime. Her words landed hard, cold, certain. You could hear a few gasps in the audience, quiet, but real. Even the host, Peter Langston, looked unsure of what to say next. But again, Ibrahim didn't respond with anger. He didn't argue. He simply stared at her in silence. And that silence, measured and unshaken, said more than 1,000 words ever could. The mood in the room shifted. It wasn't just Judge Judy's answer that felt uncomfortable lit was the confidence behind it. Confidence that suddenly felt unsteady. Then Ibrahim spoke again, slow, clear, with the steady force of someone who had lived the truth he was speaking. What if? I told you, he said, that the justice system is built in a way that sees certain people as criminals before they even speak. The audience stirred, murmurs rose. Even the host sat up straighter, his expression changing from neutral to visibly tense. It wasn't just what Ibrahim said, it was how he said it. No yelling, no blame, just the truth, delivered plainly, powerfully. He hadn't called anyone a racist. He hadn't made personal accusations. He had simply asked the question many had never dared to speak out loud. And now that question filled the room. Then, instead of continuing with statistics or arguments, Ibrahim shared something personal. When I was 8, he said quietly, I saw my father dragged out of our home by armed men. They didn't ask questions. They didn't have a warrant. They beat him in the street, just because they could, just because he didn't look like someone with authority. But he was a school teacher. The room went still. No one moved. No one spoke. The pain in his voice was real, but it wasn't bitterness. It was purpose. A wound that had been turned into resolve. He went on. My uncle Ibrahim continued, was taken 2 months later. They accused him of subversion. No trial. Lawyer? No chance. We never saw him again. There were no tears in his eyes. But his voice carried a wetted deep pain that had settled so long ago it had become a part of who he was. That was my first lesson about justice, he said. that it wasn't something meant for people like us. He was sitting in a studio in the United States, thousands of miles from the streets of Burkina Faso, but somehow he brought the reality of injustice right into that room. His story wasn't just a memory, it was a mirror held up to everyone watching. Then he leaned forward again. "And that," he said, "is why I didn't study law to become a prosecutor or a judge." He paused, letting it sink in. "I studied law to defend," he said, "not to punish, but to protect." His voice grew firm, or not louder, just more certain, the voice of someone who had lived what he was talking about. He described standing alone in courtrooms, representing people who didn't even speak the language of the law. People who had already been treated as guilty before they could say a word. The silence in those rooms, he said, was the loudest thing, because no one believed those people deserved to be heard. "But I stood next to them," he said. Listened. Then he turned to Judge Judy, not with anger, not to argue, but with something more unexpected. "Empathy, Your Honor," he said carefully. "You held the gavel. I had the people. You looked down from the bench and saw cases, stood beside them and saw lives." There was no judgment in his voice, no disrespect, just honesty, plain and powerful. "You judged them," he said. "I carried their stories." And in that moment, something changed. Judge Judy, known for her unshakable presence, began to shift. Her jaw relaxed, her eyes lowered just for a second. It wasn't embarrassment, not yet, but it wasn't defiance anymore either. It was something quieter, something heavier. It was the beginning of doubt. The start of realizing that maybe, after all those years in court, she had been looking at the law without truly seeing the people it was supposed to serve. Judge Judy leaned back, fingers drumming again, but this time it wasn't from tension. It was a calculated pause. She was trying to regain control, to shift the moment back in her favor. Her posture straightened, chin lifted slightly, and then came her response. "You and your statistics," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "They can be spun to fit any agenda. I don't need a spreadsheet to tell me what I've seen with my own eyes." A few audience members chuckled. It wasn't loud. It felt more like nervous laughter. Then she delivered her punchline, that familiar TV sarcasm sharpened by years in the spotlight. "This is what happens when lawyers from the ivory tower start lecturing the rest of us. They drown in numbers and forget what real justice even looks like." For a moment, it worked. Some in the crowd nodded. One older man even clapped lightly. Judy offered a small, confident smirk, like she had just reclaimed her ground. Felt like the old courtroom again, where she always had the final word. But President Ibrahim Traoré didn't T-move. He didn't smile. He didn't react. He simply waited. And when the moment was quiet again, he responded, clear, steady, and unshaken. "Is it twisting the facts?" he began calmly. "To say that black men in America receive prison sentences that are on average 19% longer than white men for committing the same crimes." His tone was firm, not confrontational, but the audience fell completely silent. He wasn't quoting opinions. He was stating facts. "And is it twisting things?" he continued. "To point out that crack cocaine, more common in poorer black communities, carries penalties 100 times harsher than powder cocaine. Used mostly in wealthier white areas, the room shifted. You could feel it. What had started as a debate now felt like a reckoning. "These numbers," he said, "aren't mine. They come from the U.S. Department of Justice. It's from your own courts. They make people uncomfortable. It's not because they're false. It's because they're true." He let the silence breathe, not for drama, but because the moment needed it. Judge Judy opened her mouth, instinctively ready to fire back. But even she hesitated. The audience wasn't with her anymore. They weren't applauding. They were listening to him. She started those numbers, but her voice caught slightly. She seemed to feel the shift, too. Ibrahim looked at her directly, not with anger, but with something deeper, disappointment. "You said justice is about behavior," he said gently. You said it doesn't see color. He paused. But if justice is really blind, then why, he asked, does it seem to see race before it even sees the evidence? Single. Questions spoken without sarcasm or anger lingered in the air like smoke from a slow-burning fire. No one moved. No one spoke. It wasn't because they were afraid. It was because the truth had hit too close to home. Judge Judy said nothing. Not because she'd been silenced, but because for the first time in a long time, she didn't have an answer. The statistics. The history, the lived reality of unequal justice, they weren't theories anymore. They were sitting in front of her, in the calm and composed figure of President Ibrahim Traoré. That's when everyone in the room seemed to realize this wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a breaking down of assumptions, not of a person, but of an illusion. The illusion that experience alone equals wisdom, or that justice has always been fair. Ibrahim hadn't come to win a televised argument. He'd come to reveal a deeper truth. And now, everyone watching could feel the shift. Judge Judy leaned forward again. Her voice dropped lower, not forceful now, but laced with something rarely heard from her on camera. Frustration and maybe even a touch of vulnerability. She was losing control of the moment. You're young, she said, hoping the words would cut to reassert some form of authority. You haven't seen enough yet. Real justice, it's not an idea or a dream. It's earned. It's learned over years, through experience, through seeing what people do when no one's watching. Her voice was steady, but the strain showed. She wasn't on firm ground anymore. And the silence that followed her words wasn't one of agreement. It was empty, uncertain. No one applauded. No one nodded. The weight in the room had shifted. Ibrahim remained seated, still calm, still collected. Then, slowly, without saying a word, he pushed back his chair and stood up. The weight of a lifetime. I've seen people like you, he repeated, not as an attack, but as a simple, lived truth. People who believe that if someone ends up in front of a judge, it must mean they deserve to be there, that the system couldn't be flawed. Just the people caught in it. The room was completely silent now. No phones buzzed, no cameras clicked. Even the host, Peter Langston, sat frozen, unsure whether to interrupt or just let history unfold. I don't say this to shame you, Ibrahim continued. I say it because I once believed it too. I believed that justice was blind, that the law was fair. But then I lived it. I defended people who had no voice. I walked out of courtrooms knowing full well that the sentence was not about the crime. It was about the color of their skin, their poverty, their accent, or their last name. He let that sit for a breath. And when someone tells me they don't need data, that their gut or their experience is enough, I think about those boys, the ones whose lives were decided before they ever had a chance to speak. Then he turned to the audience, not for applause, not for validation, but because he was speaking to them now, not just to her. I'm not asking for pity, he said. I'm asking for perspective. I'm asking that we stop pretending the system works the same for everyone. Because the truth is it doesn't. He nodded once. Not with arrogance, but with peace. That's what I've seen. And then he sat down. No one clapped. Not yet. They were too stunned, too moved. Even Judge Judy didn't respond. Not immediately. Her jaw had tightened, but her eyes were different now. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She was thinking. And for a woman who had made a career out of knowing what to say next, this time, she had none. ChatGPT said. Tension remained, like smoke that clung to the air after a fire had burned through something. Sacred. The room didn't relax. It exhaled slowly, cautiously, like it had just witnessed something too big to name but too real to forget. Judge Judy Shinlin didn't speak again that night. She gathered her notes, straightened her jacket, and nodded once, not to anyone in particular, but perhaps to herself. Not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. A silent admission that, for the first time in a long time, She had been shown something she couldn't dismiss with a wave of her hand or a sharp line of logic. President Ibrahim Traoré remained seated, composed. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply waited for the cameras to stop rolling and then quietly thanked the host, shook hands with the crew, and walked off the stage as humbly as he had walked onto it. In the days that followed, clips from the debate spread across the world. But they weren't shared for drama or spectacle. They were shared for truth. Headlines didn't scream president versus judge. Instead, they asked, what if justice has been blind not to fairness, but to reality? People didn't just watch the exchange, they remembered it. They quoted it, they taught it. Law students, civil rights activists, church groups, and journalists all revisited the moment when 2 generations of justice meant only one left unchanged. For Judge Judy, it became a turning point. Months later, in a rare public statement, she admitted, sometimes experience can be a shield against change. But that night, I listened, and I'm still listening. And for Ibrahim Traoré, it became another chapter in his growing legacy, not as a politician, but as a voice for those who had been spoken over for too long. He didn't set out to humiliate anyone. He set out to remind the world what justice was meant to be, not cold punishment, but conscious truth. And in that studio, with no courtroom, no bench, and no gavel, justice finally spoke after the debate ended. The panelists quietly left the stage like usual. But behind the scenes, in the control rooms, production booths, and especially online, something completely different was happening. Producers rushed to find the key moment. Assistants were already uploading clips to social media. Viewers, stunned by what they had just seen, reacted the way people do now when something powerful hits. They recorded it, shared it, and passed it around like wildfire. Within the first hour, a 48-second video clip of President Ibrahim Traoré asking Judge Judy a single question: if justice is blind, why does it always seem to see race before evidence? Was already going viral on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts. It didn't just trend, it blew up. Within 24 hours, the video had been seen more than 57 million times, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. The internet, which had long admired Judge Judy's no-nonsense courtroom style, now watched in silence as she had no response, not because she'd been insulted, but because she'd been confronted with something she couldn't deny. People weren't just watching the clip, they were studying it, quoting it, remixing it. TikTok creators added dramatic music to Ibrahim's voice and slowed down the footage to highlight the exact moment when Judy's face changed, when her jaw dropped. Her focus faded, and the power she always held seemed to quietly disappear. One post read, "When truth walks in, ego walks out." Another called it the softest knockout in history. The hashtag Jinghal Silence Betrayeri began trending worldwide. Soon, the man who calmly challenged Judge Judy became more than a trending topic. He became a symbol. Reaction videos poured in, not just from influencers or political commentators, but from teachers, lawyers, even retired judges. One viral video showed NYU law students watching the clip and stopping every few seconds to study how Ibrahim made his case. A well-known constitutional law professor said this was the most calm and powerful dismantling I've seen in 20 years of debate. High school teachers started showing the clip in civics classes, teaching students the power of truth spoken with dignity. Even teenagers were writing essays about how to confront injustice not with anger, but with facts. At Howard University, students held a spontaneous campus screening of the full debate, followed by an open mic night where they shared personal stories of feeling silenced, what it meant to finally be heard. Then came the words that made the moment truly historic. In an NPR interview, civil rights icon Angela Davis said, "What Ibrahim Traoré did wasn't just about facts, it was about dignity." He reminded the world that real justice isn't loud, steady, it's intentional, and it listens. Angela Davis wasn't alone in recognizing the moment. Her words were echoed in major publications around the world: Atlantic, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, and even Forbes all praised not just what President Ibrahim Traoré said, but how he said it. Calm, clear, fact-based. A breath of fresh air in an era where most political conversations feel like shouting matches. Politico summed it up best with the headline, "When Silence Wins, How Traoré Defeated an American Icon Without Raising His Voice." Even TV news anchors, used to fast-moving stories, paused to reflect. Anderson Cooper, who wasn't even part of the original debate, opened his show that night with "Something Changed Last Night." On MSNBC, Rachel Maddow said, "In an age where everyone's yelling," he whispered. And that's why we heard him. Even Fox News, which at first tried to spin the moment as disrespectful to American traditions, slowly backed off. Why? Because viewers across the political spectrum, Democrats and Republicans, were united in their reaction. Respect. One Fox commentator admitted, whether you agree with him or not, you can't deny it, he did something extraordinary. He made one of the toughest women in media history stop and reconsider. And he did it with complete calm. But the reaction outside the U.S. was even stronger. Across Africa, the full video, not just the viral quoted on national news stations. People didn't just hear the powerful question. They watched the entire exchange. The tone, the silence, the shift in emotion. In Ouagadougou, Traoré's hometown, people gathered in cafes and public squares to watch the clip over and over again. Many were in tears. Street artists began painting murals not of him, shouting or grandstanding, but sitting quietly. Hands folded, heads slightly tilted, eyes focused. Beneath the murals, a message in French read, "He didn't shout. He simply told the truth." Support came in from political leaders across Africa. In South Africa, a member of parliament called it a cultural victory against the myth of Western legal neutrality. In Kenya, students at the University of Nairobi organized a public forum titled, "When the Gavel Fails, A New Language for Justice." Even in Europe, where Judge Judy's influence isn't as strong, the moment struck a chord. Across Europe, newspapers called the moment a turning point. In France, it was described as a long overdue reckoning between old colonial systems and new post-colonial clarity. On German television, a commentator called it a moral checkmate. But the real story wasn't about just one judge or one president. It became something much bigger. It was about power across generations, about race, truth, and what happens when someone has the courage to challenge a long-trusted system with facts that are hard to hear. President Ibrahim Traoré didn't come to the U.S. to go viral. He came to speak calmly, clearly, and with purpose. And in a media world that thrives on noise and outrage, he brought something different: stillness. On a stage built for showmanship, he chose sincerity. Where others might yell, mock, or try to win the crowd, he simply told the truth with calm, care, and conviction. And in that moment, the world listened, not because he shouted, but because he didn't have to. There were no arguments, no dramatic walkouts. Just one voice and a message so honest, so rooted in lived experience that it didn't need volume. To have power, while Judge Judy had built her reputation by commanding silence with a gavel. It was Traoré's quiet truth that taught us the true meaning of silence, the kind that makes people stop and think, not just obey. And now the story turns to us. Have you ever stayed quiet not because you were wrong, but because you thought no one would listen? Have you ever entered a room where your story didn't seem to matter, where someone's title, age, or fame made you feel small? What if your voice, spoken not in anger but in quiet strength, was the very thing that could change the conversation? Would you speak? Or would you stay silent one more time and watch things stay exactly the same? Because in the end, this moment wasn't really about a judge. It wasn't even just about justice. It was about courage. It's the quiet kind. the kind that doesn't need to win an argument just to speak the truth and not back down. This story was never really about a president. It was about something bigger, a moment of reckoning. For years, Judge Judy was seen as the face of justice in the public eye. Her gavel, her sharp tone, and her nonsense attitude made her a household name. She stood for law, order, and authority and millions respected her for it. But recently, something changed. The world met someone new. A calm, thoughtful man from West Africa, raised in the spotlight, but shaped by real-life struggles and injustice. He walked into her world quietly. No flashy entrance, no rehearsed lines, no intention of winning headlines. And yet, in just a few words, he changed everything. He didn't attack her. He didn't try to embarrass her. He simply spoke the truth with calm, with strength, and with clarity. And in that moment, something shifted. Because justice isn't about who talks the loudest. It's about who speaks the clearest. From that point on, the legacy started to look different. Now, when people talk about courage, about respect, about what it means to speak truth without raising your voice, they won't just think of the judge behind the bench. They'll remember the man who stood before Huron, reminded the world what real justice sounds like. Note, the character of Ibrahim Traoré and all other names mentioned in this story are entirely fictional. Any similarities to real people, past or present, are purely coincidental. This story is a creative work and does not reflect actual events. If this story made you feel something, made you think, or opened your eyes, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more meaningful stories to life. Thank you for being here.